Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I apologize that I will be speaking in English. Je parle français, mais je suis très inefficace en français. Alors, je le fais en anglais, and I also want to that must be the English-speaking people who are applauding. But I also brought a little book with a horrible title, or the horrifying title of Expulsions, for Isabelle Lefort, who I really admire the project that she did, bringing together 100 authors to write about a positive economy. So this is for Isabelle. And now I'm not going to talk about such terribly positive things. You see the title, Less High Finance and More Localism in Our Economies. The argument that I want to make is that when I ask myself, what is the steam engine of our epoch? The steam engine being that which is present everywhere, directly or indirectly. Most people think information technologies, and they are actually right. But I, partly as a provocation, want to argue it's high finance. Now, high finance is not about money. That's the problem. The traditional bank sells money it has. Finance, high finance, sells something it does not have. And in selling what it does not have lies its creativity and its dangers. Its creativity because it has to invent often extremely complex instruments to invade other sectors. These other sectors are the grist for its mill. I don't know how you say that in French at all. But anyhow, what you need in order to do the mill. Not that that helped very much, I realize that. Now, it develops these complex instruments to invade sector after sector. It financializes. In the 1980s, it went for luxury buildings and high-level debt. By now, they're into everything. Used car loans, student loans, low-grade debt. So what I want to arrive at the end of this very, very short presentation is that high finance is good at making capital. And we need a lot of capital to transform our economy into a green economy, green transport systems, social housing. We need to bring it down to materialize it. The problem is that finance, while good at making capital, is very bad at governing its own power. So it very often winds up at the other side of the curve, and then it becomes highly destructive. My argument is basically we need more distributed economies, and we need, yes, the making of capital to do certain types of investments, but we need to be able to govern that. Now, to give you an idea of finance as capability, by the way, I'm clearly not using it a la Amartya Sen, because for Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, capability is inherently positive. I'm making a different argument. A capability is a variable. Time one, some of these may be very good. Time two, they may not be so good. But I also argue that there are negative capabilities. And in some ways, high finance very often winds up being a negative capability. The United States is ground zero for demonstrating some of these negative aspects of finance as a capability. Now, this graph that you are seeing, look at that curve. The instrument is a very important instrument, credit default swaps, but we don't need to get into that. What I want is that growth curve from 2001 to 2007, the highest point. It increased from less than $1 trillion to 62 trillion. Think of anything that can have that rate of growth. You'd have to be an extreme credit card user to get to that. 62 trillion. Those 62 trillion are not simply all money. When the crisis hit between 2007 and 2008, 35 trillion, poof, disappeared as if nothing. Poof, it was down. So, and in fact, the total value of money in the world today, according to the central banks, of actual cash, money, is about, at most, 300 trillion. The value of finance, as measured by outstanding derivatives, which is the basic measure, is more than a quadrillion. Now, I know in Europe you don't say quadrillion, huh? But it is a lot of zeros. That I can assure you. So at that same point, when that was 62 trillion, that was more than global GDP, which was 54 trillion. That is the GDP of all the countries in the world, including China. And the value of finance at that point was 630 trillion, which is 15 times global GDP at that time, in 2007, 2008. So that just to give you a sense of finance as capability. The money doesn't exist. It's very easy for finance to go beyond 100% of a country's GDP, for instance. In the United States, it's now like 500%. In the UK, same thing. Germany, always a bit more discreet, 300 times. So we are talking about something that is very elusive. We think of it in terms of money, but I think that's a mistake. Traditional banking, we can think about in that way. Now, here are examples of this powerful capability that has used the mathematics of physics, not the mathematics of microeconomics. The mathematics of physics, those who develop models that can track what cannot be measured. That is finance. Here is an example of an instrument. Very modest little houses. What was the challenge for finance? To de-link the modest value of those material assets from their low value, from the instrument that was going to wind up in the high finance circuit. It took 16 enormously complex steps. This is really a superstructure of brilliant, brilliant people to produce very elementary brutalities, not grand brutalities. When you build a dam and you destroy villages and woods and I don't know what all, the destruction is a grand brutality. The complexity of building a dam, it's a grand, complex project. This is what I'm talking about. Are elementary brutalities with an overhead of enormously complex instruments. In the back room of Goldman Sachs, a famous financial firm, this is just one example, this holds for all financial firms. The back room used to be the room where the secretary sat. Now you have 100 physicists working on developing these instruments. It's the technical problem. It is like when napalm actually was thrown in Vietnam and all that water, and the general said, and the water killed the napalm, so to say, and whatever the establishment said, give us a napalm that can resist water. There is so much water in Vietnam. And then they did. They developed brilliant, brilliant chemistry, brilliant engineering, a napalm that could resist water, and in fact was activated by water. So the technical problem, what it is used for, is a very important question. Now, in the case of these modest neighborhoods, here was the result of a brilliant innovation. that allowed the high finance circuit to benefit from the existence of a lot of little, very, very, very modest little houses mixed up with high-grade debt, etc., etc. Millions out of their homes. Now, the United States is a very big country, so you can say, 13 million households out of their homes. Okay, that's not a great share. 13 million households is, of course, up to about, could be 30 million people. I'm Dutch. That's twice the population of my country. And it would be like a voice from up there says, all right, all of you on the territory of the Netherlands, out. Where you go, I don't know, but out. And now we're going to repeat it. Now, Europeans often think that this is not happening in Europe. It is. The highest foreclosures include Germany. We tend to think that the German economy does everything sort of right. Well, you also have that instrument. It's a very mobile instrument. Wait till it hits India and China. And so, as you can see, these are monthly, these are not accumulative, yearly, I mean, these are not accumulative every year. In Hungary now, 1 million households. So these are very destructive instruments. Now, corporate profits kept rising throughout this period. That dip in the curve, that is when the crisis hits. Corporate profits had a crisis that lasted about half an hour. I exaggerate, it was 2 years, all right? That dip. And then it went on. And if you look at corporate assets, they didn't even notice the crisis. In the meantime, governments got deeper in debt, including the German government. These are too many numbers for you to look, but all of these countries, with few exceptions, had losses or increases in government debt, which is a kind of a loss. And people got richer or poorer, the middle class. This is a graph that I think is spectacular. This is 100 years of the income of the top 10%. This is income, not wealth, in the United States. And there, when it goes down, is the occasion. This is the adorable Keynesian period from 1940s to 1970s. That is when the middle classes rise. And then it goes up again. Now, I want to end with a question: where do we start to make a new economy? And here, a few steps. Return to traditional banks for most loans to households and firms. There is no reason that 70% of consumer banking in the United States is in the hands of 5 large banks. When a little bank, a local bank, owns your debt and you pay interest, chances are that recirculates in the locality. The best thing for a city and a locality is a lot of redistribution. What can be done locally, do it locally. Keep high finance for making capital, but bring it down. Green economy, social housing, etc. And so the idea for me is distributed, multi-sited, highly variable. But the key alarm rings for me with high finance. This is a challenge. And when you look at the transatlantic treaty that is being signed, which gives corporates their own private, parallel legal system, they can contest national law, national legislatures. It's going to be a battle. But I have the impression that the battle has started, and that's a good sign. Thank you very much.